Hello, Adult Sunday School Leader. You don't have to be a huge basketball fan to recognize names like Stephen Curry, Kevin Durant, LeBron James. But let's go back a little bit in time. What about Michael Jordan or Shaquille O'Neal? Or maybe even a little bit further back in time. Perhaps you're more familiar with Bill Russell, Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Of course, now he was known when I was growing up in grade school as Lou Alcindor. Or even Karl Malone. Now, I'm not a big sports fan, but even I recognize those names. Now, I'm going to take just a minute and talk about Karl the Mailman Malone. Now, as I admitted, I'm not a big sports fan, so I didn't realize until working on this lesson about the controversy surrounding him concerning a statutory rape of a 13-year-old while he was a college student. Now, I'm not excusing that at all. Okay, but right now, what I want to talk about is his outstanding basketball career. Now keep in mind, though, that Malone's past, well, it's going to serve as a good illustration in a couple of weeks when we look at David and Saul. So put that in the back of your mind. So Karl Malone, he was a two-time NBA MVP. He scored just shy of 37,000 points in his NBA career, making him the third highest scorer in NBA history, right behind LeBron and Kareem. And he holds the record for the most free throws made and free throws attempted. Now, I have a connection with Karl Malone. We shared a year at Louisiana Tech. I was in my senior year when he was a freshman. Now, we didn't know each other, but I'm sure at some time we passed each other on campus. Maybe even rode up in the elevator together. I don't know. Well, after college, he was drafted in the first round by the Utah Jazz in 1985, where he spent all but 1 year of his 19-year career. Now, while at Utah, he was teammates with John Stockton. Now, John Stockton, is that a name that you recognize? I'm sure several of you do, and maybe it's embarrassing to admit this, but I had not heard of him until I was doing some research for this lesson. John Stockton spent his entire basketball career with the Utah Jazz from 1984 to 2003. He was a capable scorer. He averaged 13.1 points per game, but he's best known for his assists. In fact, Stockton holds the NBA record with over 15,000 assists during his professional career. Now, in case you don't know, an assist is when a player passes the ball to a teammate in a way that directly leads to a score. So Stockton didn't get credit for those points, but he got the ball to someone, usually Malone, who was able to score. Without that assist, the score wouldn't have happened. Now, Malone, the third highest scorer in NBA history, couldn't do it all by himself. He needed Stockton to assist him to get the ball to him so he could score. See, they functioned as a cohesive unit, which is why the duo was called the 1-2 punch for the Utah Jazz. But for the next 6 weeks, we're going to be examining several men in the Old Testament whose assistance caused another's success. And that unit's called more than a sidekick, serving alongside others. This is the first lesson. It's going to be about Aaron and Hur. Focal passage is out of Exodus 17 and Exodus 24. And the point of the lesson is this: leaders don't lead without the help of others. Well, not everyone can be the boss. Not everyone gets credit for the win. A coach, a quarterback, a pitcher might get credit for a win, but it takes everyone, every position, offense and defense, to contribute to the team's success. If you're not the boss, if you're not the coach, if you're not a leader at your job or at your church, don't forget that your contribution is vital to the success of your business or church. Whether you're the assistant regional manager or assistant to the regional manager, you are important. Well, our first set of scriptures is Exodus 17, verses 8 through 10. And this is the story of Moses and the children of Israel. They've already escaped Egypt. They've walked on dry ground across the Red Sea, and they've arrived at Rephidim. And that name means place of rest. Well, earlier in this chapter, we can read of a miracle at this very location where Moses struck the rock with his staff and water came forth. Well, in our text this week, we have the first mention of the Amalekites, since they were first mentioned back in Genesis 14. These people were descendants of Amalek, Esau's grandson. They were a constant thorn in the side of Israel. We have no idea what provoked the attack. Could it be that they thought that they were being invaded? Or they didn't want to share their limited resources of water or whatever with them? We don't know. And sometimes we don't know why we're being attacked when it seems that we're doing the right things. Now, sometimes God does allow events to happen to us because He's disciplining us. But not every negative thing that happens to us is a punishment from God. And sometimes Satan, he'll attack us when we're doing God's work because we're putting a dent in the kingdom of darkness. But not every bad thing that happens to us is a satanic attack. And sometimes the result of our own foolishness causes chaos in our lives, doesn't it? But not every bad thing that happens to someone is because of a bad decision they made. All right, let's talk a minute about Moses' staff. In Exodus 3, we see Moses tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, so naturally he's got his staff in his hand when he encounters the burning bush. In the next chapter, in Exodus chapter 4, verses 1 through 17, God used Moses' staff to show His power and told Moses to take this staff and perform signs with it. And at the end of the chapter, when Moses returned to Egypt, Moses' staff is also referred to as the staff of God. We'll see that mentioned here in a minute as well. Well, we can then see in Exodus 9:23 that when Moses held his staff forward to the sky, hail rained down on Egypt. And in Exodus 10:3, when Moses stretched out his staff, locusts swarmed Egypt. In Exodus 14:16, we read that when Moses raised his staff over the Red Sea, the water parted, and the Israelites walked on dry ground. And then earlier in this chapter that I've already mentioned, back up in verse 5, Exodus 17, verse 5, it was the same staff that Moses struck the rock with that caused the water to gush forth. Now, by no means was this a magic stick, but it was a physical representation of the power of God. Moses made a point of saying that he was going to take this staff with him when he went up to the hilltop the next day. Well, this is also the first mention of Joshua in the Bible, but he's going to be mentioned about 200 times more in Scripture, and he will eventually become the leader of Israel after the death of Moses. But at this time, Joshua was an assistant, one whom Moses trusted to select capable men to go fight against their enemy. You see, a good leader will delegate, which is something that Moses knew, and he did here, but he's going to learn that even more so from his father-in-law in the next chapter. Well, Joshua did what he was told. He went out to fight, and Moses took his brother Aaron and this guy named Hur, H-U-R, Hur. He took these two guys with him to the top of the mountain. Now, there are three men in the Bible named Hur, and this one is the most famous of the three. Now, let's make sure that our students know that the 1959 movie Ben-Hur, starring Charlton Heston, was based on an 1880 novel. It's a good story, has a good point, but it's just that. It's a story. It's what's called historical fiction. It's taking bits and pieces of historical events and adding fictional characters and plots to make an interesting tale. The main character of the story, Ben-Hur, is not a biblical figure. Well, let's take a look at the next set of scripture in Exodus 17, verses 11 through 13. These verses don't state that Moses held up his staff, but our previous verse said that that's what he was going to do. But we don't know for certain why Moses felt he had to hold up the staff. I feel that even though it's not recorded, Moses must have felt led by God to do so. And what that had to do with Israel winning or losing? Well, for one, that was a common posture for prayer, to raise hands. But it doesn't say that Moses was praying. He was just lifting his staff. Now, let's remember about that staff. It was not a magic stick, right? But it had been instrumental in many of the miracles that were previously mentioned. It represented the power of God. So whenever Moses held the staff up, the Israelites were winning. But when his hands got heavy and he lowered the staff, the Amalekites were winning. And that's where our sidekicks, Aaron and Hur, they come into play here. They sit Moses down on a rock and they support his hands so that the staff is constantly raised. They helped the leader be more successful and help him accomplish the task that was before him. I believe it's important to note that the victory, it was a combination of God's power, the skill and diligence of Joshua and his army, and the intercession of Moses with the assistance of Aaron and Hur. Joshua couldn't have succeeded without Moses, who couldn't have done his part without the help of Aaron and Hur, and no one would have been successful without God working through the whole situation. So I believe this continues to be how God operates in the church. Without God's power and blessing, we don't stand a chance. Teachers can teach, preachers can preach, but without God's power and blessing, it's just words. And behind the teachers, behind the preachers, and others are on the front lines of the church, should be intercessors praying for God to empower and to bring success to those doing his work. So teacher, I'm talking to you. Who is lifting you up? And also, who are you lifting up? Now, do you find it interesting that Moses, who's the leader, he wasn't on the front lines, but he was the intercessor. He was watching the battle from the hill. It shouldn't surprise us, but leaders are called to lead and equip. That's what Ephesians 4 verses 11 and 12 tell us. A saying that I've heard is that too many leaders work in the ministry and not on their ministry. Well, through everyone doing their job, Joshua was successful in leading the Israelites to victory. Now, in Exodus 18 through Exodus 23, those chapters, several key events happen. Jethro advised Moses on how to delegate. The Israelites arrived at Mount Sinai, where Moses received the Ten Commandments. Also, laws about concerning idols, personal injuries, property, and the Sabbath were given there as well. Now, our last set of scriptures follows all that. It's Exodus 24, verses 13 through 15. And here God summoned Moses to come up onto Mount Sinai and receive those tablets of stone containing the Ten Commandments. As Moses was getting ready to depart, he told the elders that Aaron and Hur were in charge of handling disputes. Moses trusted these men who took it upon themselves to help Moses out earlier during that skirmish with the Amalekites. Now, this is the last time we read anything at all about Hur. We know as we look forward into chapter 32 that Aaron wasn't the best leader, as he encouraged the construction of the golden calf. Good leaders making poor decisions have been with us throughout all time, haven't they? Well, what can we take away from these scriptures? Here's just a couple of thoughts. Okay, number one, effective leadership involves delegation and trust. Teacher, is there someone in your class to whom you can delegate something to? I've got someone in my class who makes the coffee and cleans the coffee pot every week. Now, I'm certainly not above that, and I do that occasionally if that person's going to be absent, but that's something he enjoys doing, and it's not my job to do everything, especially stifling the exercise of someone else's spiritual gift. So what can you delegate? Another thing, number two, when you see your leader, when you see your pastor or another leader in the church struggling, step in to help him or her. Aaron and Hur did that. What area does your pastor need help in? Now, this isn't religious. This has anything to do with church. I struggle with anything that involves plumbing, electricity, woodworking, all that stuff. So when I have an issue, there are these group of guys I can call who can come and help me out. And they have saved me a host of money. And a couple of those guys are actually my Sunday school teachers. So I know, or actually I hope, they're watching this, and I do appreciate you guys. They step in and help this guy out. Now, the last thing here, to summarize the point of this lesson, it just says it so well. Leaders don't lead without the help of others. So next week, we're going to be in the second lesson in this unit about those number 2 guys, looking at Barak. Thank you guys so much for watching. I do appreciate you so much. Thank you. And don't forget to pray for and with your class. Brett, you say you watch this video every week to the very, very end. So hopefully you're watching this right now. So if you're watching, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you so much for helping me. And Greg, I don't know if Greg watches this to the end or not, but I'm hoping he does. So thank you guys so much for helping me out with all of my home repair needs. Thanks, guys.